In the vast shadows of the Pacific in early 1943, long before most Americans even knew the scale of the coming air war, the United States Army Air Forces began conducting a series of reconnaissance flights that would remain classified for decades. These were missions that officially did not occur, flown by aircraft that often returned with no logs, no signatures, and no explanation. One commander later noted in a declassified memo, "If these aircraft fall, they fall alone." It was the quiet beginning of a secret aerial campaign designed to map a vast empire, one photograph at a time. The struggle for intelligence in the Pacific was unlike anything the Allies faced in Europe. Japan's defenses stretched across thousands of miles of open ocean, with early warning stations, island airstrips, and patrol networks designed to intercept intruders long before they neared the mainland. To breach this shield, the USAF turned to modified aircraft, the B-24D Liberator, stripped down for range, the F-7, a reconnaissance-configured variant equipped with Fairchild cameras, and later, the elusive F-13 Superfortress, the reconnaissance version of the B-29. These machines were sent into skies where weather patterns were brutal, navigation often imprecise, and rescue nearly impossible. The crews trained at isolated fields in Hawaii and on Midway Island, learning to fly at altitudes their aircraft were never originally designed for. Among them was the 20th Combat Mapping Squadron, formed specifically for Pacific photographic reconnaissance. Their missions required flying deep behind enemy lines alone, without fighter escort, relying on altitude and silence. A diary entry recovered from a crewman of the 6th Photo Group captures the tension. "No one wishes to be the first to break radio silence. If we speak, the world hears us." These flights often began before dawn. A Liberator or F-7 would rise from bases like Guadalcanal or later Saipan, its engines straining under the weight of fuel packed into every usable space. The objective: photograph Japanese-held islands, ports, and troop concentrations. Targets included fortifications on Truk Lagoon, airfields on the Marshalls, and naval installations around Rabaul, locations so heavily defended that even approaching them was considered a near-suicidal act. Yet reconnaissance crews had no bombs, no armor plates beneath their seats, and no room to maneuver. Their job was simply to fly straight, steady, and unseen. Historical insight reveals how vital these missions were. In February 1943, a series of clandestine reconnaissance runs over the Solomons exposed the Japanese efforts to reinforce Kolombangara Island. This intelligence helped shape the Allied strategy that led to the eventual bypassing of the island altogether, a decision that saved thousands of American lives. Still, much of the documentation surrounding these missions remained sealed until the 1970s, leaving many wartime accounts incomplete or contradictory. One particularly mysterious operation involved an early long-range reconnaissance flight toward the Japanese home islands in late 1943, months before the public believed any American aircraft had reached that far. Details remain sparse. Declassified fragments suggest that a specially modified B-24 and its crew of 10 disappeared after radioing that they had encountered unexpected cloud cover near their turning point. No wreckage was ever found. Historians still debate whether they were forced down by weather, navigation error, or enemy interception. For decades, their flight was not acknowledged in any official chronicle. As the war expanded, the arrival of the F-13 Superfortress transformed the intelligence picture. With a ceiling above 30,000 feet and the ability to carry advanced cameras like the Trimetragon system, the F-13 could photograph entire cities from a single sortie. The 3rd Photo Reconnaissance Squadron flew the first mission over Tokyo on November 1, 1944, months before the massive B-29 raids began. The images they brought back were so detailed that analysts could count individual ships anchored in Tokyo Bay. Yet this groundbreaking flight was immediately classified. Even the families of the crew did not know what their loved ones had accomplished. But the secrecy came at a price. With records restricted, missing flights were sometimes attributed to training accidents or mechanical failures far from the truth. Survivors rarely spoke of what they had seen. "We didn't ask questions," recalled one F-13 navigator in a post-war interview. Questions got people pulled from missions, and sometimes that meant someone else wouldn't come home. These reconnaissance operations set the stage for the strategic bombing campaign that followed, mapping every major industrial and military site the USAF would later target. Yet many of the original negatives, flight logs, and mission briefings were stored under restricted access classifications for so long that gaps in the historical record remain. Even now, researchers occasionally uncover references to flights with no surviving documentation, missions that likely took place but officially do not exist. As we leave this first chapter of the story, one question lingers. How many early reconnaissance flights over the Pacific were never recorded, never reported, and never returned? And how did these unacknowledged missions quietly shape the air war that was still to come? The answers begin to emerge in the next part, with the shadowy nocturnal operations of Carpetbagger, missions flown in secrecy across the heart of occupied Europe. By early 1944, as Europe remained under the iron grip of Nazi occupation, a quiet transformation was taking place at a remote airfield in Northamptonshire, England. RAF Harrington, officially just another Allied base, had become the center of one of the most secretive aerial operations of the war. At night, black-painted B-24 Liberators lifted off without fanfare, each carrying clandestine cargo that could tip the balance of resistance movements across Europe. These were the aircraft of Operation Carpetbagger, a mission so secret that many of its logs were wiped clean, and some of its flights remain the subject of unanswered questions even today. The struggle began long before wheels left the runway. Crews of the 801st Bomb Group, later redesignated the 492nd, were selected not for their combat records, but for their tolerance of uncertainty. Unlike traditional bombing missions with planned routes and predictable targets, Carpetbagger sorties were guided by coded signals from resistance cells, signals that might be faint, misaligned, or compromised by German counterintelligence. The pilots flew low, often below 500 feet, relying on moonlight to outline the edges of forests, rivers, and villages. One navigator, Lieutenant Arthur C. Young, later wrote in his journal, "We navigate by shadows and the faith that someone on the ground is still alive to guide us." Historical context reveals why these missions were so vital. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, needed a reliable way to infiltrate agents, weapons, and radios into occupied territories ahead of the planned Allied invasion of France. The Maquis in the French interior required explosives to sabotage rail lines. Dutch and Belgian resistance fighters needed radios to coordinate intelligence. Carpetbagger crews became the secret bridge connecting these underground fighters to the broader Allied war effort. Every supply crate they pushed through the bomb bay had the potential to disrupt German logistics for weeks. The tension these flights endured cannot be overstated. German night fighters patrolled aggressively across northern France and the Low Countries, while anti-aircraft emplacements near major towns were capable of tracking even low-flying intruders. Carpetbagger crews practiced throttling back their engines mid-flight to reduce noise, gliding silently across the countryside. It was a dangerous tactic, one miscalculation, and the aircraft could stall. But silence was often the difference between an unnoticed drop and a deadly interception. One newly declassified mission file from June 1944 highlights the razor-thin margin between success and disaster. A Liberator designated Black Susie took off from Harrington with a load of Sten guns and plastic explosives for a resistance group near Limoges. When the crew reached the coded drop zone, the signal lamp, meant to blink in a precise pattern, appeared faint and erratic. Was it resistance fighters? A German trap? The pilot ordered a second pass. The lights blinked again, but this time slightly out of sequence. With fuel running low and enemy searchlights beginning to sweep the region, the crew made the uneasy decision to abort. Intelligence later suggested the original resistance group had been captured the previous week. Whether the lights they saw belonged to German forces reenacting the signal or another cell attempting an imperfect imitation remains unknown. Quotes from surviving crew members paint a vivid picture of the nightly tension. Pilot John Jack Musgrave later recalled, "The fear wasn't of being shot down. It was of dropping a man into the wrong hands." Some flights carried single OSS agents who stepped out into the darkness with a bicycle, a coded notebook, and little else. Their survival depended on the accuracy of the navigation and the integrity of the contacts waiting for them below. Not all missions ended with certainty. Several aircraft vanished during carpetbagger operations, their wrecks only discovered decades later in remote forests or mountainous terrain. In one case, a Liberator assigned to a Belgian drop in February 1944 disappeared without transmitting a distress call. Post-war searches revealed scattered debris in the Ardennes, but the cause of the crash, whether mechanical failure or interception, has never been conclusively determined. Missing mission records from that night have only deepened the mystery. Reflecting on these operations provides modern insight into the complexity of wartime intelligence work. Carpetbagger crews were not just pilots. They were the lifeline for fragmented resistance networks relying on trust, secrecy, and dim lantern signals in the night. Their missions represented a fusion of aviation skill, human bravery, and covert strategy at a scale that had no precedent. Yet even with successful drops, the story rarely ended cleanly. Reports filtered back weeks later, often incomplete or uncertain. Did the agents make contact? Did the weapons reach their intended hands? Sometimes there was silence, broken only by rumors or unverified accounts. The gaps in what is known highlight how many of these missions faded into obscurity once their immediate tactical purpose was fulfilled. As this chapter closes, a haunting question hangs in the air. How many clandestine flights crossed Europe under the cover of night, logged only on coded slips of paper that were later burned? And what hidden operations were considered too dangerous, too experimental, or too unpredictable even for carpetbagger crews? Those questions lead us deeper into the next part, toward Operation Aphrodite, one of the most hazardous and obscure air programs of the entire war. In the summer of 1944, as Allied forces pushed across Normandy, a little-known and unsettling project was quietly taking shape on remote airfields across England. Its purpose: to create the world's first guided drone bombers, using worn-out B-17s and B-24s packed with more than 10 tons of explosives. This initiative, codenamed Operation Aphrodite, remains one of the most dangerous and least understood programs of World War II. Many wartime participants spoke of it only in fragments, and even today, pieces of the story are missing, buried in classified reports, or lost with the aircraft that never returned. The struggle began with a singular challenge. The Allies faced heavily fortified German structures, V-1 and V-2 launch sites, U-boat pens, concrete bunkers, so thick with reinforced concrete that conventional bombs barely scratched them. Traditional air raids risked enormous casualties and offered uncertain results. By mid-1944, Allied command believed a radical solution was needed. The answer, they argued, was to turn obsolete bombers into giant, remotely guided missiles. But the technology of the era was primitive, unreliable, and untested under combat conditions. Crews understood that these missions hovered somewhere between innovation and suicide. To execute the plan, the USAF paired with the U.S. Navy's similar program, codenamed Anvil. Pilots from the 562nd Bomb Squadron of the 388th Bomb Group were selected not for their seniority, but for their willingness to face the unknown. Each Aphrodite aircraft, usually a worn B-17, redesignated BQ-7, had most of its interior stripped away to make room for Torpex, a highly volatile explosive far more powerful than TNT. The cockpit was outfitted with television cameras and radio control gear, allowing a trailing mothership to guide the drone after the crew bailed out. Yet here was the first complication, and a deadly one. Someone had to take the aircraft into the air, climb to altitude, and set the autopilot before parachuting out. Two-man volunteer crews took this responsibility. One pilot noted in a letter never mailed but later found among his effects, "We fly a machine designed to die. Our only hope is jumping free before it makes its final run." Historical insight reveals that the concept was ahead of its time, but the execution lagged behind. Radio interference, weather, mechanical failures, and the limitations of 1940s remote control systems made success elusive. On August 4, 1944, the first Aphrodite mission launched from RAF First Field. 2 BQ-7 aircraft lifted off, each guided initially by volunteer pilots who parachuted away over the English countryside. But once under remote control, the drones behaved unpredictably, veering off course or descending too early. Neither hit its target. A more tragic incident occurred on August 12, 1944, during a Navy-led Anvil mission. Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., older brother of future U.S. President John F. Kennedy, was co-piloting a PB-4Y-1, a Navy-modified B-24, packed with explosives. Moments after takeoff, the aircraft detonated mid-air before the crew could bail out. The explosion was so powerful it shattered windows miles away. The official cause was attributed to a malfunction in the arming circuitry, but portions of the investigation report remain missing, fueling decades of speculation about whether electrical failure, vibration, or a premature switch activation triggered the blast. The reveal of new information in later years has only deepened the intrigue. Declassified memos indicate that some Aphrodite missions might have been diverted toward experimental testing grounds rather than enemy sites. A partially redacted OSS communication suggests at least one aircraft failed to respond to remote inputs and proceeded on unknown trajectory. What became of that aircraft, and whether it crashed harmlessly into the sea or struck an unintended location, has never been fully established. One successful, though still controversial, aspect of the program was its contribution to later remote control technologies. The challenges Aphrodite crews documented, radio lag, terrain interference, signal oscillation, became foundational knowledge for post-war developments in guided missiles and unmanned aircraft. A surviving technician's note states, "Failure taught us more than success ever could." Yet operational success during World War II remained minimal. Many Aphrodite drones failed to strike their intended targets. Others malfunctioned or crashed prematurely. Only a handful reached German-occupied territory at all. The psychological toll was equally significant. Ground crews worked in constant fear of handling aircraft stuffed with unstable explosives. Pilots lived with the knowledge that a single spark or loose wire could end their mission before it began. By early 1945, Operation Aphrodite was quietly phased out. Its results were considered inconclusive, and its losses difficult to justify. Many of the detailed mission logs were sealed, and some were destroyed outright to avoid public scrutiny. What remains today is a patchwork of testimonies, technical drawings, and partial reports, enough to outline the program, but not enough to solve all its mysteries. As this chapter closes, one question lingers. How many Aphrodite missions failed not due to enemy fire, but because of the very experimental systems they relied upon? And what other covert operations, conceived in urgency, flown in secrecy, were unfolding at the same moment? The next part brings us over the Pacific once more, toward the classified high-altitude reconnaissance missions that mapped Japan before the bombing campaign even began. In late 1944, long before most Americans understood the scale of the coming air war over Japan, a new breed of aircraft began rising from freshly captured airfields in the Mariana Islands. These were not bombers, but scouts, high-altitude reconnaissance machines known as F-13s, the photographic variant of the B-29 Superfortress. Their purpose was hidden behind layers of classification, to photograph the Japanese home islands with unprecedented clarity, mapping every port, factory, and military site months before the first major bombing raids. These missions, though often overshadowed by the combat operations that followed, were among the most dangerous and least documented flights of the Pacific War. The struggle began on Saipan, where the 3rd Photo Reconnaissance Squadron arrived in the autumn of 1944. Their aircraft were modified B-29s with camera bays replacing bomb racks, and operators trained to use trimetragon camera arrays capable of capturing panoramic images at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. Yet the challenge lay not in the equipment, but in the environment. Flying over Japan meant crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean, navigating unpredictable jet stream winds that few pilots had ever experienced, and entering airspace defended by radar-guided anti-aircraft batteries and fighter interceptors. "We were alone up there," one F-13 navigator later recalled. "Too high for escort, too critical to fail. Historical context shows why these flights mattered so deeply. Before the USAF could plan a strategic bombing campaign, it needed precise, up-to-date intelligence about Japanese industrial networks, intel the Allies had struggled to obtain since early in the war. Satellites did not exist. Signals intelligence was incomplete. Only photographs taken at high altitude could reveal the scope of Japan's war production. The challenge was getting those photographs without losing aircraft and crews to the unknown. The hook came on November 1, 1944, when Captain Ralph D. Steakley led the first successful reconnaissance mission over Tokyo. The risk was enormous. No American aircraft had struck directly at Japan from the Marianas before, and Japanese command believed mainland interception was still possible. Steakley's F-13 climbed above 30,000 feet and approached Tokyo in the early morning haze. Below, the city spread out like a dense grid of factories, rail yards, and naval facilities. The cameras clicked continuously for nearly 35 minutes. When the aircraft returned to Saipan, analysts realized they were holding some of the most detailed intelligence photographs of the entire war. The mission was immediately classified at the highest level, and the crew's accomplishment remained largely unknown until years later. But not all missions returned. The reveal of missing reconnaissance flights has left historians with lingering mysteries. One F-13, designated Hobo Queen II, vanished during a late December 1944 sortie toward Nagoya. Radio reports indicate the aircraft encountered unexpected high-altitude turbulence, likely part of the newly discovered jet stream, and struggled to maintain altitude. Moments later, contact was lost. No SOS was heard. No wreckage was found on land or sea. Weather experts later noted that crosswinds at 200 miles per hour could have pushed the aircraft far off its intended course. Whether it went down in the Pacific or crashed into remote Japanese mountains remains unknown. Intelligence insights from these flights changed the course of the war. The photographs revealed vulnerabilities in Japan's industrial layout, wooden urban centers, sprawling shipyards, and major choke points in transportation grids. Bombing planners used this intelligence to craft a new air strategy, one that would later define the B-29 campaign. Yet the classified nature of the missions meant that even among the crews stationed on Saipan and Tinian, few understood the full impact of the reconnaissance work. One ground crew member recalled, "We loaded film, not bombs. But we knew something big depended on what those lenses captured." For the crews, the difficulty was not just enemy defenses, but also the unknown nature of high-altitude flight. The B-29 was still a relatively new aircraft, and its engines were prone to overheating and catastrophic failure when pushed to their limits. Cabin pressurization sometimes malfunctioned, forcing crews to use oxygen systems for hours at a time. In a debriefing found in post-war archives, one pilot noted, "If the engines don't kill us, the elements might." These issues combined to create a sense of isolation. At 32,000 feet, with no escort and no backup, a single mechanical problem could doom the mission. The modern reflection reveals how groundbreaking these flights truly were. The techniques developed for the F-13 missions became the foundation for Cold War aerial reconnaissance and future satellite imaging. Their successes and their losses shaped intelligence gathering for decades. In many ways, these crews were pioneers of a new form of warfare, seeing the enemy from heights that rendered traditional defense obsolete. Yet as we close this chapter, a sense of unresolved curiosity persists. For every successful mission, there were flights lost to weather, mechanical failure, or unexplained disappearance. The incomplete records, missing logs, and erased mission numbers leave more questions than answers. How many reconnaissance aircraft simply vanished into the Pacific without a trace? And what photographs, what intelligence went with them? These questions lead directly into the next phase of our story, the secretive world of airborne electronic warfare, where modified bombers tested classified jamming equipment over Europe while intelligence officers kept their work hidden behind decades of silence. By early 1944, as the air war over Europe intensified, another type of mission emerged, one without bombs, without headlines, and without public acknowledgement. It was conducted by small, specially modified aircraft operating from obscure airfields in England. Their mission: to wage an invisible war across the electromagnetic spectrum. These were the crews of the USAF's Special Flight Sections, tasked with testing and deploying classified electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt German radar networks. Their operations, still partially hidden behind redacted files, became a crucial yet little-known component of the Allied victory in the skies. The struggle began with a chilling reality. By 1943, German radar-guided defenses had become deadly accurate. Systems such as the Freya early warning radar and the powerful Würzburg gun-laying radars gave the Luftwaffe a decisive edge in detecting Allied bomber streams. Losses over targets like Schweinfurt, Bremen, and Hamburg underscored the urgency of finding a countermeasure. In response, American engineers, working closely with British scientists from the RAF's Telecommunications Research Establishment, developed a series of electronic jamming devices intended to blind German radar. But before these devices could protect thousands of bomber crews, they had to be tested in real combat environments. To conduct these tests, the USAF formed special units embedded within existing bomb groups, often under ambiguous designations such as Special Flight Section or ECM Test Detachment. They operated from airfields like RAF Skulthorpe and RAF Cheddington, where B-17s and B-24s were modified with belly antennas, ventral transmitters, and sealed racks containing classified electronics. Some devices were so sensitive that ground crews were forbidden from opening the casings. Only authorized technicians knew what was inside. These flights were often carried out in isolation, sometimes parallel to main bomber streams, sometimes ahead of them, and sometimes on entirely separate routes. The aircraft tested systems like Carpet, a broadband jammer meant to overwhelm German frequencies, and Jostle, a high-powered transmitter capable of drowning out Luftwaffe communications. But deploying these devices was a delicate balancing act. Too strong a signal could give away the aircraft's position. Too weak, and it would be useless. "We flew on the edge of the unknown," one ECM operator later recounted. If the equipment failed, we were just another lonely bomber in hostile skies. A diary entry from a radio operator with the 36th Bomb Squadron, attached to a special flight section, offers rare insight into the tension of these missions. No bombs loaded today. Instead, boxes of wires and switches humming behind me. We test the gear over the North Sea. No formation, no escort. Dark clouds hide us, or hide what's hunting us. The entry ends abruptly, with no further explanation recorded for that day. The reveal of the true scope of these missions came only decades later when fragments of declassified documents began to surface. One report from January 1945 describes a mission in which a modified B-24 flew ahead of the main bomber force toward the Ruhr Valley to test the effectiveness of the Jostle transmitter. Halfway through the mission, the aircraft experienced severe electrical interference, forcing the crew to shut down part of the system. Moments later, they reported a sudden radar lock from ground defenses. The aircraft narrowly escaped interception by German night fighters and limped back to base. The cause of the interference was never identified. Some historians believe it may have been an early form of German countermeasure. Others suspect an internal electrical fault. There were darker mysteries, too. Several aircraft vanished during ECM test missions without leaving detailed logs. A B-17 assigned to a Carpet test flight over the North Sea in February 1945 sent a final transmission stating only, signal distortion increasing. Unable to determine source. It was the last message received. Post-war searches uncovered no wreckage. Whether mechanical failure, weather, or enemy action caused the loss remains unknown. The absence of complete flight records, likely classified or intentionally fragmented, has only deepened the speculation. Modern reflection reveals that these missions helped pioneer the electronic warfare strategies that would dominate later conflicts. Techniques developed during Carpet and Jostle tests became the foundation of Cold War jamming technologies and airborne electronic intelligence platforms. Yet at the time, their success was measured not in public accolades but in invisible outcomes. Radar screens flickering, enemy operators confused, bomber corridors suddenly safer. Still, secrecy came at a cost. Many airmen never received recognition for their work, and families of missing crews often received only vague explanations. Training accident, some were told. Lost in adverse weather, others heard. The classified nature of the missions meant the truth, whatever it was, remained locked in vaults for decades. As this chapter closes, a final question hangs in the air. How many missions were launched not to drop bombs, but to test unknown devices whose functions were only partially understood, even by their crews? And how many of those missions disappeared into the fog of war with their stories sealed by silence? The final part of our story turns to the war's endgame, post-strike recovery flights, missing aircraft searches, and the quiet missions that try to solve mysteries even as new ones emerged. In the final months of World War II, as the end of the conflict drew near, a different kind of mission emerged, subtle, unpublicized, and often undocumented. These were the post-strike assessment flights, search and locate sorties, and recovery missions that followed the major air operations across both Europe and the Pacific. Their purpose was simple yet perilous: determine what had truly happened after the bombs fell, locate downed aircraft or missing crews, and retrieve sensitive materials before they could be found by enemy forces. Though overshadowed by the more dramatic events of the war's closing act, these missions carried their own dangers and uncertainties. Many were launched quietly, at odd hours, with a small crew and no guarantee of return. The struggle these crews faced was immense. By early 1945, Japan and Germany were still capable of fierce resistance despite their declining strategic positions. Navigation remained difficult, weather unpredictable, and enemy fighters still prowled the skies. In the Pacific especially, vast stretches of ocean swallowed aircraft without a trace. The 20th Air Force, operating from bases on Tinian, Saipan, and later Okinawa, conducted reconnaissance and recovery flights immediately after major bombing raids, often before smoke had cleared from target cities. Their instructions were direct: photograph the results, identify fires still burning, and evaluate target destruction. But the unspoken mission, one rarely recorded, was to locate missing aircraft that had not returned with the main force. Intelligence officers called these straggler search flights. A typical sortie involved a handful of crew members flying at medium altitude, scanning for oil slicks, drifting debris, or isolated life rafts. A pilot with the 313th Bomb Wing described the tension in a letter home. "We look for anything, an orange dye marker, a wingtip, a mirror flash. Sometimes we think we see something, turn back, and it's gone." Many of these sightings were never confirmed. Some were recorded in logs that later disappeared into classified files. Historical insight reveals why these missions mattered so much to Allied command. Lost aircraft often carried cameras, encrypted radios, or radar components that could not fall into enemy hands. Recovery teams were dispatched when a crash site was believed accessible. On Iwo Jima, recently captured by U.S. Marines, small detachments from the 7th Fighter Command were sent to investigate the remains of B-29 crews believed to have gone down during the battle's final days. Their reports were rushed to intelligence officers and sealed. A fragment from one such file notes: site located. Wreckage partially salvaged. Sensitive equipment accounted for. Crew remains uncertain. In Europe, the situation was more fluid. As Allied troops advanced into Germany in early 1945, they encountered downed aircraft, American, British, German, scattered across forests, fields, and riverbanks. USAF teams, often attached to larger ground units, were instructed to recover dog tags, mission documents, and anything of intelligence value. But the fog of war created confusion. Not all aircraft could be identified. Some crash sites showed signs of scavenging, other signs of hurried burial. A field report from the 9th Air Force mentions a crashed P-47 near the Rhine with papers removed prior to arrival, raising questions that were never resolved. The reveal of missing post-strike missions adds another layer of mystery. Several flights launched from Guam and Saipan during the spring of 1945 simply disappeared. One B-29, assigned to photograph the aftermath of the March 9th firebombing of Tokyo, transmitted a shortwave message stating, "Visibility poor. Turning south." It was the last anyone heard. Weather records show strong crosswinds over the Philippine Sea that day, capable of blowing an aircraft hundreds of miles off course. No confirmed crash site has ever been located. These missions also included the retrieval of sensitive reconnaissance film. After low-level photo flights over Japan, the exposed film had to be returned quickly for processing. A small number of aircraft were designated film ferries, flying at maximum speed to deliver canisters to intelligence officers. Their routes were isolated, their crew lists often incomplete. One such flight from Okinawa in July 1945 vanished en route to Tinian. The film it carried, believed to document port facilities in Osaka, was never recovered. Whether weather, mechanical failure, or hostile action caused its loss remains unknown. Modern reflection shows how crucial these missions were in shaping post-war understanding of air operations. The intelligence gathered during post-strike assessments influenced not only bombing tactics, but also the initial planning for occupation and reconstruction. Yet the secrecy surrounding the missions meant that families of missing crew members often received only vague accounts. Operational loss became a catch-all phrase for aircraft that had vanished during unrecorded flights. For decades, researchers have attempted to reconstruct these missions from fragments of declassified memos and personal diaries. But the final closure remains elusive. Many flight logs were destroyed under wartime security protocols. Others were altered, partially redacted, or mislabeled. Some missions appear only as brief references, special flight ordered. One ship dispatched, no further report, with no supporting documents. As this story concludes, one haunting question echoes across the decades. How many of these quiet missions, search flights, recovery runs, post-strike assessments, ended not in triumph, but in silence, their aircraft drifting into the vastness of the Pacific or the forests of Europe, their stories locked away or forgotten? The war ended, but many of its secret missions did not leave clear answers. Their mysteries remain part of the enduring shadow of the air war, hidden in classified vaults, missing logs, and the empty spaces on wartime maps where aircraft were last seen, but never found.